And this is my new video. This video is about a story of Islam. Let's do. In the 6th century, most of Arabia was a vast and empty desert. For miles the ground was either dry and cracked, or filled with rolling sand dunes and jagged rocky peaks. The only water was found at natural springs called oases, which dotted the desert. Small towns grew up around them. The shepherds came to graze their herds of goats and sheep. Many Arabians were nomads, spending their lives moving their animals from one oasis to the next. Others crossed the desert with long lines of camels, known as caravans, carrying sweet smelling spices, luxury clothes, or exotic perfumes, which they sold from town to town. One of the largest trading places was Mecca, an oasis town near the west coast of Arabia. Hundreds of traders came here each day to do business. But other people came on holy journeys or pilgrimages to a large stone temple named the Kaaba. Most Arabians worshipped lots of different gods, which they believed lived in the rocks and trees, and the Kaaba contained hundreds of altars and shrines dedicated to them. Also, all Arabians spoke the same language. They belonged to different tribes, who were often at war with each other. They ransacked each other's caravans in the desert, and even murdered members of rival tribes. But in the 7th century, all this changed thanks to just one man. His name was Muhammad. The life of Muhammad. Until he was about 40 years old, Muhammad lived a similar life to many other people in Mecca. As a boy, he worked on trade caravans belonging to his uncle, Abu Talib. Then, for a rich widow named Khadija, who he later married. The work was hard, crisscrossing the baking desert, often with little food or water. But Muhammad loved sitting by the campfires at night, listening to traders' stories about love, history, and war. Muhammad was popular and trusted by everyone. He could have lived the comfortable life of a wealthy trader, but he was troubled by the world around him. In particular, he hated the way many rich people spent their days gambling, drinking, and fighting. They treated women and children terribly, cheated the poor, and often lay drunk in doorways. Muhammad began to spend his spare time in a cave on a mountain outside the town, thinking and praying about the problems in the world. Sometimes he sat there for an entire month, while his daughters brought him food and water every few days. One day, in around the year 610, Muhammad was sitting alone in his cave when he heard the voice of an angel speaking to him. The angel told Muhammad that he was one of God's messengers of prophets. He should tell everyone that there was only one God, named Allah in Arabic, and that this God would judge everyone when they died and send them to heaven or hell. Over the next few years, Muhammad received more and more messages from God. Sometimes he saw visions of an angel. Other times he heard voices in his head. They told him that people should be kind to their parents, generous to strangers, and pray to God to forgive the things they had done wrong. Muhammad memorized the messages and repeated them to his friends, to his family, and to anyone in Mecca who would listen. The people who believed Muhammad called the messages revelations. They wrote them on pieces of dried animal skin and carried them everywhere they went. The revelation said that believers in the messages should be called Muslims, which means those who submit to the will of God. Their new religion became known as Islam, submission to God's will. There is no God but Allah, the Muslims declared, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Others weren't so convinced. Many Meccan businessmen realized that if people rejected the gods worshipped at the Kaaba shrine, pilgrims would stop coming to the city. They won't rent our hotel rooms, they complained, or drink in our inns. How will we make any money? So they accused Muhammad of lying and persecuted his followers. Some Muslims were arrested, others were beaten, and one was even left to die in the desert, crushed beneath a huge rock. A few years later, in 619, both Muhammad's wife Khadija and his uncle Abu Talib became ill and died. Things seemed bleak for Muhammad. But the next year he described to his followers how an angel had carried him on a miraculous flight to heaven, where he spoke to other prophets such as Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. This incredible journey gave Muhammad strength to carry on. Until now, Muhammad had been protected by his uncle, who belonged to a powerful tribe called the Quraysh. But now that his uncle was dead, even the Quraysh turned against Muhammad, sending assassins to kill him as he slept. Luckily, Muhammad learned of the plot and escaped. By now, Mecca had become too dangerous for Muhammad. In 1622, uh, he and his followers moved to Yasrib, an oasis town 320 kilometers, or 180 miles, to the north. Muhammad already had some supporters there, and they welcomed him into their homes. Muhammad stayed in Yasrib for the next 2 years. He built a place of worship for Muslims, known as a mosque, and lived beside it a simple house made of mud bricks. He continued to receive revelation from God about how people should live, and more people began to listen. Soon, Muhammad had become the leader of the entire town, which later changed its name to Madinat al-Nabi, or City of the Prophet, or Medina for short. The Meccans were still determined to destroy Islam. When Muhammad left Mecca for Medina, they offered 100 camels to anyone who could bring him back, dead or alive. Now they attacked families of other Muslims who had moved from the city, stealing their houses and selling their property. Muhammad decided to fight back. In March 624, he led over 300 followers to capture a Meccan caravan carrying Muslim belongings. Furious, the Meccans sent an army against them, and the two sides fought near a well in the desert named Badr. Muhammad's followers were outnumbered almost 3-1. But they still drove the Meccans back to their city. The Muslims had become a powerful fighting force. Soon it was too powerful for the Meccans. In 630, Muhammad gathered an army of over 10,000 Muslims and marched to their city. The Meccans surrendered with little fighting. Cheered by his followers, Muhammad marched through the streets to the Kaaba temple, where he destroyed the altars to all the old gods. From now on, the Kaaba was dedicated only to Allah. The conquest of Mecca was a spectacular success for Islam, but the effort left Muhammad exhausted. He returned to Medina but fell ill with fever in 632 and died in his home in June that year. His followers turned his house into a tomb, and the mosque beside it became one of the most sacred sites in their new religion. The five pillars of Islam. The history of Islam after Muhammad's death is an incredible story of empires rising and falling as the religion spreads around the globe. Today, it's one of the largest religions in the world. Some Muslims argue about different aspects of their faith, but they all lead their lives according to the same basic customs and beliefs. These are known as the five pillars of Islam. The first pillar is simply a declaration called the Bababat, in which a person states his belief that there is no true God except Allah, and that Muhammad is a messenger of Allah. The second pillar of Islam is special prayers, or salat, which Muslims are expected to make 5 times every day, facing in the direction of Mecca. They also pray together each Friday in mosques. The third pillar is charity. Each year, Muslims are supposed to give a percentage of whatever money they have saved to help the poor. They believe that this money, known as zakat, will help make their own wealth poor. Muslims commemorate the month in which Muhammad received his first revelation from God by avoiding all food and drink between sunrise and sunset every single day. This fasting, which they call Sawm, helps them feel closer to God and reminds them how lucky they are to have food. The month is called Ramadan, and it ends in a festival of feasting and prayer called Eid al-Fitr, or breaking of the fast. Finally, all Muslims who are required to make a holy journey or pilgrimage to Mecca once in their lives. This pilgrimage is called the Hajj, and this is the fifth pillar of Islam. As well as these 5 pillars, some Muslims also celebrate significant events in Muhammad's life. These include his birthday, his miraculous journey to heaven, which they call the Miraj, and his journey from Mecca to Medina. But most important of all are the revelations given to Muhammad by God. During Muhammad's lifetime, his followers wrote down the exact words of these messages. Together, they form a book known as the Quran, which means to be read. The Quran contains 114 chapters or surahs written in Arabic. As well as praising God, the surahs give Muslims guidance on aspects of their everyday life, such as marriage, law, or charity. Qurans are always placed on stands to avoid them being damaged. Making a beautiful handwritten copy of the book is regarded as an act of great worship. To make sure the revelations are the same as when Muhammad first heard them. Not one word of the Quran has been changed since it was first written down. The first caliphs. Muhammad's followers were stunned when he died. How could he leave them? They asked. After all, he was their prophet. One man even drew his sword, refusing to allow anyone to bury Muhammad's body. Other Muslims turned to Muhammad's closest friends, a man named Abu Bakr, for answers. He had known Muhammad since they were young and had been one of the first to hear the Prophet's revelations. Muhammad is indeed dead, he told a crowd in Medina. But God is alive and will never die. But who will let us now? People asked. There was no easy answer. Muhammad hadn't left clear advice about who should follow him as leader of the Muslim community. Eventually, Abu Bakr was chosen and given the title Caliph, which means successor. I have been chosen by you as your leader, he said. So, I am no better than any of you. If I do well, give me support. If I do wrong, set me right. 3 more caliphs followed Abu Bakr over the next 30 years. Umar, Usman, and Muhammad's cousin, Ali. These 4 leaders were known as the rightly guided caliphs because they led according to Muhammad's example, wearing simple clothes and living in simple houses. Without guards, they used the words of the Quran to guide them in the way they led the Muslim community. By the time Abu Bakr died in 634, almost all of Arabia had converted to Islam, but the rightly guided caliphs saw it as their holy duty to carry the message of the Quran even further. To do so, they built an army. Marching from Arabia, a 4,000 strong Islamic force defeated the army of the Christian Byzantine Empire to conquer Syria and Palestine. Then they marched against the Persians and Mesopotamia, defeating them too. The Muslims soldiers were often outnumbered, but they were fired with religious passion. The Quran promised that any Muslim who died for his religion would go to heaven. Charging into battle, they shored enemy ranks with arrows and spears. Allah is great, they cried. There is no God but Allah. The caliphs never forced people in conquered lands to become Muslims. Some people converted to Islam because it seemed simpler than religions that worshipped many gods. Others had grown tired of heavy taxes on the previous rulers and hoped for better treatment from the Muslims. Those people who didn't convert to Islam had to pay an extra tax, which means they would be protected by the Muslim army. So eventually, most people did adopt the new religion. Islam was also spread by Muslim traders, leading huge camel caravans. These men braved the scorching desert sun and treacherous mountain passes to carry their gods beyond the edges of the new Islamic empire. They took perfume, pottery, and grain and returned to Arabia with gold, glass, and ivory from places as far away as West Africa and India. To make their journeys easier, they built hundreds of shelters called caravanserais, where they could rest and feed their camels. But the great new Islamic empire didn't stay united for long. After the death of the third caliph, Usman, in 656, Muslims began to argue about who should be the next leader. Many believed that it should be the person who was most likely to follow the example and traditions of Muhammad, known as the Sunnah. This became known as Sunni Muslims. Others felt the caliph could only be chosen from descendants of Muhammad himself. That they believed the Prophet's cousin Ali should lead them. Later, this group became known as Shia Ali, the followers of Ali, or Shiites for short. The Shiites refused to accept that Abu Bakr, Umar, and Osman had been real caliphs and always regarded Ali as the first. After Ali's death in 661, a tribe of Sunni Muslims known as the Umayyads took control of the Islamic Empire. They expanded Muslims' lands as far as India in the east and Spain in the west, almost a quarter of the way around the world. Arabic became the official language of the empire. New Islamic coins were created, and there was even a postal system. But instead of behaving like caliphs, the Umayyads acted like kings. They moved their capital away from Mecca to Damascus in Syria and lived in lavish palaces. People believed they spent their days drinking wine surrounded by beautiful women, which was against Islamic law. To fund their extravagant lifestyles, the Umayyads taxed non-Muslims more than ever before. Previous caliphs had given this tax money to the poor, and so the Umayyads became very unpopular. They had betrayed the spirit of Islam. The Umayyads no longer had such a powerful army to protect themselves either. The soldiers who had helped build the empire had settled down as farmers and refused to fight anymore. In 715, a group of Shiite Muslims named the Abbasids, who were descended from Muhammad's uncle, Abbas, raised an army of supporters and defeated the Umayyads at the Battle of the Great Zab. The Abbasids declared themselves the new caliphs. This was the beginning of the period of great wealth and culture that became known as the Golden Age of Islam. This is